There is a question every single human being has asked. Not just philosophers, not just the religious, every person who has ever stood at the graveside of someone they loved, every person who has ever lain awake at 3 in the morning thinking about how little time there might be left. What happens the moment you die? For most of history, science had one answer: nothing. The brain stops, the lights go out, everything you are, every memory, every love, every fear, simply ends. But in 2001, a cardiologist in the Netherlands decided to actually study what happens, not theorize, not speculate, study, with proper methodology, in a hospital, published in the world's most prestigious medical journal. And what he found, ancient India had already described, in extraordinary detail, thousands of years ago. Dr. Pim van Lommel spent 13 years studying cardiac arrest survivors across 10 Dutch hospitals, 344 patients whose hearts had stopped, whose brains had gone clinically silent, who were, by every medical definition, dead. 18% of them, 62 people, reported something that should not have been possible. They described leaving their body, watching their own resuscitation from above, able to accurately describe details of the room, conversations the medical team had, objects they could not have seen from where they were lying. Some described moving through darkness toward an overwhelming light. Some described encountering people who had already died, and every single one of them described something that Van Lommel could not explain and could not dismiss. Their consciousness, their awareness, was sharper, clearer, and more vivid at the moment their brain had completely stopped functioning than at any point in their ordinary waking lives. He published this in the Lancet, not a fringe journal, not a spiritual publication. The Lancet, where the world's most rigorous medical science is held to account. His conclusion after 13 years, consciousness appears to be able to function independently of the brain. The brain may not create awareness. It may only be the channel through which awareness operates. He didn't know what to call this. He had no framework for it. Ancient India did. About 2,500 years ago, a young boy asked the same question Van Lommel spent 13 years trying to answer. His name was Nachiketa. His father, in a moment of anger, said something that parents sometimes say and immediately regret. He said, "I give you to Yama, to death." Most children would have been terrified. Nachiketa walked calmly to the door of death and knocked. Yama, the god of death in ancient Indian tradition, was not home. So Nachiketa waited 3 days, without food, without water, alone at the threshold of death, not because he had to, because he had a question that nothing else in the world could answer. When Yama returned and found this child waiting, he was moved. He offered Nachiketa anything: wealth, kingdoms, 100 years of life, any pleasure he could name. Nachiketa refused every single one. He said, "All of those things end, and when they end, I will be back at this door with the same question I have now. So tell me, what actually happens here? What is the real nature of what I am?" Yama, the god of death himself, later said that he had been waiting for thousands of years for someone to ask this question with that kind of clarity. Most people, he said, choose the comfortable answer, the wealth, the pleasure, the distraction. Very few sit at the door of death and ask what is actually on the other side. What Yama told Nachiketa is the central teaching of the Katha Upanishad, one of the oldest texts in human history. He said, "You are not the body. You were never the body. The body is like a set of clothes the soul puts on for one lifetime and removes at death, the way you remove a jacket at the end of the day. What you truly are, the atman, was never born. It will never die. It does not end when the body ends. It simply continues. It has always simply continued. And here is the thing that stops you cold when you read Van Lommel's research alongside the Katha Upanishad. His cardiac arrest survivors, people with no religious agenda, no spiritual framework, no reason to report anything other than what they experienced, described leaving the body the same way. They described awareness continuing the same way. They described a clarity and a peace that they could not find words for, which is exactly what ancient India said would happen when the atman, freed briefly from the body, recognizes what it actually is. Van Lommel asked, "Why is consciousness clearer when the brain has stopped?" The Katha Upanishad answered this question 2,500 years ago. Because consciousness was never the brain's creation. The brain was its container. When the container breaks, what was inside doesn't disappear. It simply is no longer contained. I want to be honest with you about something. Nobody can tell you with certainty what happens after you die. Not science, not ancient India, not this video. What I can tell you is this. A cardiologist spent 13 years studying 344 people who came back from clinical death, and every framework he tried to use to explain what they reported collapsed. The only conclusion he could honestly reach was that something in us continues, something that doesn't need the brain to function, something that becomes, if anything, more itself when the body's noise goes quiet. And 2,500 years ago, a young boy sat at the door of death for 3 days, refused every comfortable distraction that was offered to him, and asked the one question that mattered. The god of death told him, "What you are cannot be cut by any weapon. It cannot be burned by fire. It cannot be drowned. It cannot be dried by the wind. It is ancient. It is unchanging. And it has never, not once, been in any danger." Maybe the most honest thing any of us can do with this information is stop living as if the person we are is only as permanent as the body carrying them. Because if the Katha Upanishad is right, and if 62 people who came back from the edge of death are telling the truth, then whatever you actually are has never once been at risk. Subscribe to the Dharma Room, ancient wisdom decoded for the modern mind.